Dad always used to say the only causes worth fighting for were the lost causes.
The Senator yield. No, sir, I will not yield.
Government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
You're listening to a Pyrolitical Pyrocast. Hello and welcome to the Pyrolitical Pyrocast. We're happy to have you with us tonight. I'm Randall. And there's Thomas, but he can't hear apparently right now, so we'll just go with it. Can you hear now, Thomas? He can't hear. Okay, so we're happy to be here with you. Thomas will be with us in a moment.
Hi.
Can you hear me, Thomas?
I don't know what happened. I had a volume issue. So anyway, anyone watching me live stream, go to pyrolitical.com tonight. You'll hear us do the show live. It's awesome. So, and you'll hear the full audio. You'll get to hear Randall's silky voice. So, Randall,
Silky.
good.
Wow.
Good to hear and see you.
Thanks. It's good to be heard and seen.
What did you discuss while I was?
I just introduced us. Welcome
oh, you got it all.
Pyrolitical Pyrocast.
Hey, we have some great topics tonight, folks. We're going to talk about land.
Dirt. We're going to talk about dirt.
This is a topic old as dirt, and we're going to invite you to go subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's Pyrolitical Live on YouTube. So go look up Pyrolitical Live and subscribe to show your support for what we do. We are here every Wednesday. So,
well, before we get into land, should we talk at all about our new president? He was inaugurated since our last episode.
Well, he's doing some things that appear to be good. We'll see if they have any teeth in them. But there are a lot of conservatives that are happy right now. The honeymoon hasn't ended.
No,
apparently.
The honeymoon won't be over for a while. But yeah, but that's the thing, right? You see this new president, he's taking action. Wow, that's amazing. That's awesome. Let's see him do that. And you know, right now I'm listening to a book called The Book Thief. You ever heard of it?
Oh, yeah.
Set in Nazi Germany. And I can't help but think, I mean, not saying that Trump is going to be Hitler, but the Germans were really excited about the bold actions that Hitler was making too. And so, like I said, I'm not saying Trump is Hitler. I'm just saying it's important to be aware because we don't want to have ourselves in that situation where we're like, yay, we're super excited and super, patriotic, and our leader is amazing, and we think he has, no chance of being corruptible or whatever. I mean, we need to be vigilant. That's the price of liberty, right? Eternal vigilance. And so as wonderful as some of the things he's doing may seem, we just need to be aware that, you don't want to be taken either way, whether your guy or the guy you don't like is in office. You need to still be vigilant because, it doesn't take long for a small rainstorm to become a deluge.
A deluge?
Yeah.
Love it.
Love that.
Love it. I do love that out of your soundbite, that our enemies or anyone against our positions could take you and say, Trump is Hitler. I'm not saying that Trump is Hitler.
Well, hey, there have been plenty of the so-called liberal or mainstream media who have tried to make that connection before. So I don't think I'm new. I'm not the first one out there to say anything like that. But
are you saying that Trump is Hitler? See, they just got me too. So they're stuck. We should do like in our intro music, we should put some kind of mix in there. But we're not saying Trump is Hitler. What we're saying is we don't know what he is yet. And that's the thing. He's in a week. Now, I will say he's done 12 executive orders so far, everything ranging from border wall to deportations and sanctuary cities. He's looking at manufacturing regulations, steel and American steel, speeding up environmental reviews for infrastructure, the Dakota pipeline, federal hiring freeze. He says that agencies cannot fill any vacant positions. Not like they ever had any vacancies they actually needed to fill. Right. TPP, he signed a memorandum. Now, that's very different saying signing a memorandum than actually withdrawing. But we'll see where that goes. Abortion, he has ordered that federal dollars cannot go to organizations that provide abortion services. Hey, amen for that. Great. ACA rollback. He's also allowed all agency heads to waive requirements of the Affordable Care Act. To me, Randall, what it means is there's some meat in some of these, but a lot of it's more symbolic and it's a message than actual law or enforceable. But I believe the president has the right to have a bully pulpit and to, do these things. So Trump, hey, for his first week, I think it's great. There are a lot of, and we're going to talk about public lands, all broadcasts tonight, well, most of it. And Trump, there are agencies that are afraid of what he will do, and local and land or state-based agencies that have hope that he will work better with, and that his agencies will work better with, property owners and ranchers and that. So we'll see. I'm not complaining though, technically, at what Trump's doing right now.
Yeah, well, neither am I. I'm thrilled at some of the things that I've seen him do in these first couple days. But like you said, some of them are just symbolic. But obviously the market likes what he's doing. This is the first time we've been over 20,000 points in the Dow Jones Industrial Average ever.
I made a comment today with the Dow Jones. You want to hear what it was?
Sure.
Wages have stagnated. Inflation is up. Unemployment was way up. But somehow the Dow Jones is at 20,000, over 20,000. I'm like, man, the boys and girls on Wall Street, the casino of America, they're doing fine.
They're doing fine.
Even
they're excited.
Every other
about it.
Economic indicator is pretty stagnant or bad, but Wall Street's good. So we got to keep Wall Street strong. Oh, there's another soundbite. Pyrolitical loves Wall Street. That's not what we're saying here. And we're not saying Trump's is Hitler. We're not saying that.
No, not at all.
Sorry. Is that the running gag through this episode?
I think that's going to be it. It's going to be it at the end of, hey, and we're talking about land. And by the way, Trump is not Hitler. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. What did you think of Trump's inaugural speech, Randall? Did you like the speech? Well,
no.
I mean, he hit the points that he's been hitting on the campaign trail. Good for him. Good for him. I mean, a lot of presidents, being inaugurated, they get up and they give their speech, and it may be inspirational or whatever, but typically it tones down the rhetoric that they've been spouting on the campaign trail, because now we've won, right? We're in the White House, and now it's going to be business as usual. So I don't know whether it was hey, it's not going to be business as usual, or hey, my speechwriter's out of a job and this is what he left me with.
No, this is the rumor was that Trump wrote the speech.
I believe he did. But
I said that I thought Trump's inaugural speech was awful. And people were like floored, especially conservatives, because anytime you hear political speech, you're like, rah, 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 we're excited about, hearing America first. And the thing that there were a couple high points, Randall, like I did like when he kind of lambasted Chicago, Obama's old stomping grounds. And I did
Chicago, Obama's sitting there next to him.
Yeah, he was sitting on stage with Trump. I liked that.
If anything, it showed that, unlike those that have gone before, he's trying to show that he's not afraid of the political establishment. He's gonna be his own president, and he's not gonna just follow what previous presidents have done. So more power to him there.
Well, and that's the thing about as far as what Trump said. As far as one thing I heard in a speech was that a righteous people, it's required. Oh boy, was it 2 righteouses? Righteous people is a righteous nation. He actually used the term righteous in a presidential speech. That was another high point, because what that says is that's an acknowledgement that God is the source of prosperity and blessings. In fact, it says in the preamble of the Constitution, the blessings of liberty, right? So I liked that talk. However, the rest of the speech, from talking about how Americans would never be forgotten, Americans will never be forgotten, and that we would always be there for all Americans, for the poor and education. I just thought this is populist fluff.
Well,
to me.
And the first part, he was talking about jobs and the infrastructure and how sorry the state of the U.S. is, and it wasn't word for word, but he went through that cycle of we're going to rebuild and make America great again about 3 times before he started to get into the meat of his talk. And so I was like, well, he needed to fill some time. He didn't want to have, just a 2-minute. I'm here. I'm your president.
Hey,
now. Welcome to the
up?
party. Yeah.
I'm setting up in the White House, yo. Gonna make America great again, MAGA. Hashtag MAGA. I wish she had said that, though. Okay, so, yeah, so far I did get a question, Randall, and I'm not sure. Some news outlets are saying that Trump had terminated the TPP. I got asked on Facebook here. As far as I know, he signed a memorandum that says it withdraws the U.S. from signing the trade deal. So does that mean he's terminating the TPP? Well, since President Obama is the one who went to sign it, I guess the president now can just withdraw from it. So I would say effectively it does withdraw us from the TPP, but I don't think it destroys the TPP from existing.
Now, that's an interesting discussion in and of itself. TPP, this is a trade deal, right? And so a lot of opponents, a lot of globalists especially, are saying, hey, he's supposed to be the business guy, he's supposed to be the free trade guy, and here he is getting us out of a trade deal. Well, what people need to understand is a trade deal is not free trade, it's managed trade. It means that the government is picking winners and losers. We're going to give special benefits to certain trade over other trade. And that's what a trade deal like that, like NAFTA and CAFTA and the TPP are all about. They're not about free trade. They're about regulated trade. And so getting out of a trade deal like that does not mean that we're trying to get out of free trade. What it means is that we're taking back control over our trade instead of giving it to these foreign bodies. We're saying, no, we would love to be involved in free trade, and we do that by freely trading with other countries, not deciding, oh, we're gonna have a trade agreement. No, you just let people trade, because it's not the government that trades. So the government
that's a good point.
May negotiate, but it's you and I and other businesses and individuals across the U.S. that engage in trade. So,
yeah, there's a difference between treaty and trade. Treaty is agreements between governments, but a trade deal should just be, as you said, free trade. Allow free parties in a free market system to negotiate and to trade. It doesn't mean that the government control the terms of that, unless there's some public interest where they're harming people. Like if you have made a trade for nuclear waste to come into the country and dump it in a lake, then maybe the government would have a role in there. I don't know. I can't see anybody doing that. But that's the absurdity of free trade deals, NAFTA, CAFTA, and TPP, is that we don't need them. Humans don't need them.
No, we may enter into an agreement with another country to say we're going to allow our citizens, both sides, to just freely cooperate with one another. But you don't need a big old agreement for that. You just say, hey, go ahead and do it.
Go ahead and do it. I have always wondered, though, as far as free trade goes, when it comes to weaponry. That's something I pondered on a lot, is free trade of guns, rockets, bombs, those kinds of things. And granted, that's looking at it in a vacuum. It's not looking at the military-industrial complex, and our governments make these deals. But in a sense, where would free trade lead us, essentially, with weapons technology that we have?
Well, I think for any military weapons technology, it's probably already covered by some other, government mandate. They regulate what kind of guns their own U.S. citizens can have, right? You can't have an M16, you can have an AR-15 because of specific differences, but you can only have a limited size of clip and all these things. So there's all these other regulations around what can be manufactured and sold and bought in the United States regarding firearms and weaponry. So
Well, I think it'd be a lot easier to figure those kinds of things out than to have our government funneling money to countries all over the world for warfare. Like, we always hear this support of Israel mantra, and if you're against Israel or at least funding them, you're an anti-Semite, when it's not that way at all. I can't find within the Constitution any justification to give foreign countries money so that they can war. Like, we give Israel, we just signed this deal with Israel where it's, what was it? $39 billion over 10 years, I believe. But it's like, no, don't give Israel money, and don't give her enemies money. Don't give any country money. And then you would see warfare, but I'm going on a tangent. We're supposed to be talking about lands tonight, Randall.
Well, talking about one more thing. You brought up Israel.
One more thing. And if you're watching on social media, I just want to say, go to PYROLITICAL.com. You'll hear Randall and myself, the full broadcast. So go ahead, Randall.
Well, since Trump took office, Israel has authorized another 2,500 settlement homes to be built in the West Bank, where they were holding off under Obama because they were uncertain. But now they feel like, okay, it's a done deal. Our relationship is going to be fine. So go ahead and open up 2,500 new homes, build them out there. So what I see is, although the economy and whatnot may have reached a parity under Obama, like a tentative treaty of understanding, so to speak, and so there had been a modicum of prosperity or whatnot, I think the reaction in the marketplace and this action by Israel and other things are the result of what the market feels is a more sure representation of surety in the economy, that the economy is not going to go crazy, and so people are willing to invest and people are willing to do different things based on the fact that they see a more sure thing in the economy.
Yeah, especially foreign investment. When you see foreign investment increase, then that is smart people, business people, investors know that the conditions are at least stable enough to justify a longer term approach to that country. So, and obviously our government tries to orchestrate those calms for economic gain. I mean, if we even knew the relationships that people have with the powers that be, I got to say, and this is off topic, but someday when we stand before the judgment bar, I can't wait till all of the secret conspiracies and combinations and relationships and backroom deals are finally revealed. And we're going to say, oh, we all thought that was true. Or, oh, some of us thought that was fake, but it wasn't. Like, I cannot wait when we find out
revealed,
all of that. Yeah, all that, graft and all that greed that goes on. So I think we've pounded in Trump's first week in office. We weren't really excited about his inaugural speech. We do like some of his executive orders that he's doing. Some have yet to be determined on where they're going to go. So, well, I think it's time to jump into our main topic for tonight. We usually cover 3 topics on every broadcast of every Pyrocast, I should say. However, tonight we wanted to talk about public lands. And I was talking to a guy on Facebook, and I think he's watching right now. We were debating public lands. And of course, I'm a very big states' powers advocate. And so I thought, I argue about this all the time, Randall, and I think you do too, that the states should control their lands. And in most of the country they do, but in the West, not really at all. And so I thought, let's look into this. Let's see what
at least
everything has.
Have 50%, right? Oh, wait a second. Not Utah, not Nevada, probably not a couple others.
Well, yeah, it's almost it's down the I was going to say Mason-Dixon line. No, the Colorado Plateau. All the states of Colorado and Wyoming and Montana west, you see this unproportional control. In fact, up to 88% in Nevada. So let's go back in time, Randall. Do you have an effect where we can go back in time? Hey, we're working on the special effects. Be patient with us, people. Now, we're going to go back to what we are going to start with is enabling acts. Enabling act. What is that? Well, when you want to join the union, there has to be some kind of legislative act take place or some kind of legal recognition of the body that wants to join the union. That's
or
a really
a treaty
bad
if you're
example.
Texas, because you were already your own nation.
Oh, yeah, a treaty if you're Texas. Very nice. Well, I'm going to read Wikipedia because it is the bastion of all truth. And it says, generally, and it says all these different countries, but it says, an enabling act is a piece of legislation by which a legislative body grants an entity, or that would be a state in our case, which depends on it for authorization or legitimacy of power to take certain actions. That would be debatable. For example, enabling acts often establish government agencies to carry out specific government policies in a modern nation. The effects of enabling acts from different times and places vary widely. Okay, so basically it's a legitimizing act that says you can be a part of this entity. However, we find that the interpretation of what an enabling act is or should be and what a state is and is not varies greatly from one Supreme Court to the other. But generally speaking, it supports the action or the viewpoint that all of the legal acts of the federal government trump state legal actions. That's the general perspective. And we're going to share some Supreme Court analysis that backs that up. So, Randall, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
When did Utah become a state?
That would be 1896, right?
You got it. Ding, ding. Good job, man.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
That's it.
Utah.
That's all I had for you.
That's the end of our show, everybody. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. I think we've settled this issue that's been argued about for 150 years or so. Now, I want to say something first, that Utah is the same as a lot of other states. In fact, I looked at enabling acts for lots of states. And I wanted to share in the Enabling Act, which was approved on July 16th, 1894, this little clause. Is it okay if I read this, Randall?
Go for it.
Now, this is something that the person I was debating yesterday, if you're watching, I went and read the Enabling Act again. It says in the second part that the people inhabiting said proposed state do agree and declare that they forever disclaim all right and title to the unappropriated public lands lying within the boundaries thereof, or of Utah, and to all lands lying within said limits owned or held by any Indian or Indian tribes, and that until the title thereto shall have been extinguished by the United States, the same shall be and remain subject to the disposition of the United States, under the absolute jurisdiction and control of the Congress of the United States. So, when we became a state, we signed this document. It's quite long. It goes into all kinds of things about marriage, because Utah liked plural marriage. Yeah, we still got that issue going on too, just like this issue. But it said that until the United States extinguishes the title, that they forever, the Congress or the federal government, they control the unappropriated public lands lying within the boundaries thereof. So that was a point brought up yesterday, is that it says forever in the contract, which it's not technically a contract, but regardless, this is an act of law. It says forever in unappropriated lands. So how do you interpret that, Randall?
Well, I think it's interesting. 2 points here. First one is taking land in the way that they did here had never happened until California became a state. And then when California became a state, it was just such a large swath of land that, and I don't know all the details behind it, but it almost seems like they just said, hey, I wonder if we said, they really want to be a state. They really want to be a state. And we really want to get the gold from California because that's going to fuel an amazing boom in our society. Right. So let's just say, hey, we're going to take these pieces, and if you let us take these pieces forever or whatever, then we'll let you be a state. And California was like, sure, no one lives there. Go for it. And
it was, and I want to say it was the Mormons that found the gold in California, actually. The Mormons found the gold. Sutter's Mill, yep.
So then they said, yeah, sure, go ahead with it. And so they're like, well, this is a great deal. So then they come to Utah, And there had already been a lot of opposition. I mean, Utah had been trying to become a state for a while. They proposed the state of Deseret, which was huge.
Huge.
It was huge. And
Mormons should have kept that gold and just kept that property. Anyway,
but they were like, no, you can't have that big of a country / state. And so finally they got them down to that. And they're like, okay, well, they're going to, nobody are in these different areas. So if we put that verbiage in there, then we can take it. But this,
are you talking the forever language?
Yeah. If we say, well, we're going to take all this uninhabited land and we're going to take it forever. And Utah's going to be like, we really want to be a state. I know, we really want to be a state. So
now
sure.
They so wanted to be a state that they're willing to sign something that says, forever, we're going to have title to the unappropriated land forever. I'm like, who thinks that's a good idea? Okay, go ahead, Randall.
So they wanted to do that, and because they didn't like Mormons and back in Washington D.C., and they didn't like polygamists, which were a lot of times one and the same. And
they didn't read their Bible,
and so they wanted to incorporate or make it a state, but they put all these restrictions in that were part of the enabling acts in order to make sure that those people were, living according to whatever the federal government wanted. But both these, from California on to Utah and all the other states, you go back to the Constitution and it said, wait a second, you're not going to own land as the federal government unless it is for federal buildings, forts, military bases. It had very specific uses, and they followed that.
There's 3 specific. We'll go over those in a little bit.
And they followed that up until California. So what made the difference for California and every state after that?
They all signed these stupid enabling acts, which have been interpreted by the federal government itself that the federal government controls the land. It's their land unless they decide to give it up. I mean, we're going to read some Supreme Court interpretations, and this is one thing I want you to challenge you. Supreme Courts don't issue rulings. They issue opinions. I think that's something important. We're not in a monarchy government where the court rules, that's it. George Washington said that the people are the final controllers of the government. We're their final arbiters, interpreters of the Constitution of the United States. We are the ones that are listed first. So if we decide that something the Supreme Court rules is unconstitutional, we have every right through our state government to undo that or to nullify that opinion, because we are the final authorities. Why have we lost that attitude, Randall? And I know that's a general, but Randall, I want to share real quick. 102 years ago, our governor, William Spry, here in Utah, complained about the federal government's reluctance to turn over land to the state that could be used for oil and gas development. He urged lawmakers to protest a federal policy that he said was violating Utah's, quote, undoubted right under the terms of the Enabling Act, end quote, to land with high revenue potential for public schools. Now, if you read the whole Enabling Act, there are provisions in there for commerce and for the people to use that land. And so even in 1915, Utah Governor William Spry is complaining that the federal government is not allowing us to use the land as specified in that agreement.
Only 21 years after the Enabling Act was passed.
Only 21 years after, wow. 21 years after the actual act, we're already complaining about it. So obviously this issue has not been resolved in our favor ever. I'm not sure. I did hear, though, as I was studying for this, Randall, there were a handful of states a number of years ago. Florida was one, Kansas. There were a handful that got together, and they basically took a stand against the federal government and said, you're not enforcing the Enabling Act as signed. Their Enabling Acts also said that the feds would have to relinquish that land to the states, but they said you're not following the specifications, and their acts are basically the same as our acts. And so they got the federal government out of their lands, And now I think Illinois has like 3% of their land, which is controlled by the feds. Yet it used to be, was it 60 or 70%? It might have even been higher. So there have been lots of states which have held the government to account for their enabling acts. We're not the first. We're just the worst, apparently, besides Nevada.
Well, and the question is, what may be the difference in terms? You know, did Kansas's act say we'll hold these lands forever? Probably not. You know, that was much earlier than Utah. Utah also happened well after the Civil War, so the 14th Amendment was in there. We had left a federal system and we were now in a national system. So so the belief and understanding about the usage of the federal government had probably fundamentally changed since the time of the enabling acts for Florida and Kansas, which probably led to some verbiage changes in Utah's enabling act and probably California's as well. So it's troubling to think that, one, we went along with it, and two, that we haven't been able to do anything about it when we've been trying since at least 1915, you know, to get access to those lands. And we keep getting the access restricted more and more. You know, just like we've talked about here a couple episodes ago, talking about the Bears Ears National Monument. Already federal land, already protected land, and we've got to protect it further in order to remove individuals' rights to be able to get on and access and utilize the land. As you said, the Enabling Act is supposed to allow the individuals in the state of Utah to use them.
Right, absolutely. And there's something to think about, too, here, Randall, as we talk about national monuments versus national parks. National parks require an act of Congress. National monuments do not. So what Obama did was technically legal a couple weeks ago when he signed 1.3 million acres into a national monument. Legal does not mean constitutional or moral. I think that's an important thing. The Antiquities Act of 1906 is not constitutional. I don't care what the Supreme Court or the Congress or the president has said since Teddy Roosevelt. The Antiquities Act is unconstitutional, and a state government could easily make the case that all national monuments within the state's borders have been done against the constitutional law, because we're going to talk about the property clause and some other things that show that there is nothing in the actual law of the land, so-called the Constitution, that allows the Antiquities Act to be legal. That's like an edict from a king,
Right.
like executive orders.
And basically it's a lazy Congress, right? Saying, oh, we don't want to have to deal with these, and there may be, you know, some issue where the president needs the power to be able to protect that land super quick. Well, really? Really?
Do you think that Congress is lazy, Randall? I mean, we've had a lot of congressmen and women in the history of this country in 220 plus years. Do you think it's that Congress is lazy, or is there more to the picture?
Well, I like to say lazy, but I mean, it's not lazy in the typical terms like they don't want to work. It's lazy in that they don't want to spend the time and intellectual rigor to debate these issues and really flesh out the details. And they're super busy with other things because they're kept busy by 10,000 pieces of legislation each year. And,
oh, really?
Yeah, and so they're like, okay, well, let's let the president do this, because if it comes to us, we're never going to deal with it. And
absolutely,
it allows them to say, hey, we did what we thought was right. You know, they can go back to their constituents. We gave the president the power so he can take care of it. Oh, what do you mean he did something we didn't like? Oh, that dang president. You know, they can complain about it, they can moan, they can groan, and they can look all right in their congressional district when they come home, because they can say, this is what we thought we did, so this is what happened, and darn that president, he didn't do what he was supposed to. You know, we tried really hard, and look what happened. And, you know, so it's like it's a way for them to claim innocence in the event. I mean, we've talked about this before regarding the Bears Ears, how many of the legislators, you know, after it happened, there's nothing we could do. You know, we tried, we talked with the president or whatever, we told him not to, but he did it because we're helpless. Well, you're the stinking legislature. You're
right.
Not helpless. You're a check and balance against the other two branches of the federal government.
But I'm a little more conspiratorial than that. I think they're afraid.
Yeah,
I
probably
I
are.
I think they're afraid. I think there's real repercussions, and at very least, you push issues like this where you challenge the power of the federal government, you're going to get kicked off committees. You're going to be forced out of government. The political parties won't finance you. I feel like there's actual repercussions. So, Randall, I wanted to tell him real quick. There was a bill that was filed a couple years ago in the Utah Senate by Jim Debacus, and it was a bill that forced an end to the land transfer debate. Basically, what it was a once and for all settle the question about who owns the public lands. And so Jim Debacus, the senator, it had nothing to do with his position on the Transfer of Lands Act that has been put in there, the Public Land Act transfer. He just wanted to have a vote and basically call what Representative Ken Ivory's doing, call his bluff. Because he's saying he doesn't have anything to stand on in court, because he's like, the courts are not going to uphold this. And so he's like, we're going to force the parties that want this to vote, because if not, then there will be $600 million a year put aside for a legal fund. And so he just wanted to get the vote done so that people could just vote and be done. So the interesting thing to me is that the issues between the government of Utah and the federal government really started heating up in 1934 with the Taylor Grazing Act. This made the Fed responsible for setting grazing rules. And that's where the stir among the American National Livestock Association began and all of that. So anyway, you get these college professors of law like John Ruppel, the University of Utah. He says, we don't think the state can make the claim that the Constitution gives the federal authority to retain. Oh, sorry, read that wrong. We don't think the state can make that claim. The States Enabling Act does not create an obligation. And in fact, in the act, the state is disclaiming any future claims to federal lands. Then why has the federal government, via the Enabling Acts, turned over lands to so many other states if it's not a precedent?
Now, they say forever in the Enabling Act, but right there in the Enabling Act, in what the second or third line of what you read, it said, until the title thereto shall have been extinguished by the United States. So in other words, it's saying, hey, we're going to hold title to it until we aren't. Right?
Yep.
And so this is a plea from the state of Utah to say, give it back, suckers.
Well, it's saying, too, these guys that are arguing for this transfer, it's saying, you've done it with many other states. Why are you not doing it with the states in the West? Now, that's not to say that everybody who lives in the states in the West want it to be transferred. I had debates with other people who are saying, we want the federal government to continue to manage because it has trails that I like, or land, and the federal government manages it better. We're not going to get into the management of lands because that would be irrelevant in court. I don't think that would have anything to do with any kind of legal argument.
Well, who manages lands, Thomas?
Well, the people manage it, but the feds control it.
Yeah, but that's the thing. It's managed by people. And most of the people that manage it for the federal government live in Utah.
Yep.
And there may be a few of them that drive in, like in our case in southern Utah, they drive in from Nevada or Arizona to do their job. But most all of them live in Utah anyway. They're Utah citizens. So why then couldn't the state then just take over management with even the same people? You know, not saying that we'd want to do that, but they're just people, right? So to say that the federal government manages it better, they're just people.
Yeah, I guess that's a great point. They're not flying out from Washington, D.C. every week to do their job and then fly home. So, yeah, that is kind of a straw man argument. So, well, and I mean, go ahead.
The other side of that is, you know, we talk about at the state legislature, they're always talking about how we're dealing with education. We have the lowest per pupil spending in the nation and how that needs to change. And, you know, liberals and educators are always talking about how we need to get more money in the classroom. And,
education. That's Governor Herbert's priority.
This lands issue directly affects that because you go to a state like we were talking about with Kansas or Illinois, where they've got 3% federal land ownership. If private individuals own all that land, the primary method of getting income for the state government is through property tax. And if 65% of the state or the land is taken up by the federal government, then you lose all those taxpayers because there's no one owning that land. And the federal government, realizing that it has permanent forever title to all these lands, that they could be potentially taxed by a state for owning the property, they give kickbacks to the state in forms of all sorts of different subsidies as a method of trying to avoid that.
Yeah, but let me explain something to you, Randall. It's called reality. I interviewed Governor Gary Herbert in 2010. Cornered him for 15 minutes. Asked him all those hard questions you'd want to ask him, at least the ones I knew at the time. 7 years later, I look back and I think I had one good question. I said, Governor Herbert, it's been rumored there could be $1 trillion in oil shale locked up in our lands. And you know that property taxes fund education, and you seem to care so much about the kids. So why don't we take back our lands and at least work some of that land? You know, self-reliance is always good. Think of all the property taxes generated. Wouldn't we technically possibly have the best education system in the United States? In fact, couldn't we just pull out of the unconstitutional education system altogether and just destroy them? You know what he said? No, I would never think about pulling out of the education system. And you make some good points, but you know, we just have to work through the system.
Milk
and I'm thinking,
milk toast. That's it.
I thought, I will never vote for you. Never have. I voted for Randall for governor. I did. I voted for this guy. I love him. He knows everything. So no, but seriously, when the governor said that, I was kind of like that kid on the Christmas Story when Santa Claus tells him you'll shoot your eye out. I was like, oh. I knew we had nobody in charge, no maverick, so-called, that would actually stand up for the state and for its justified rights. Well, let's go into some more technical stuff, because I know that this has been a lot of rhetoric and just some history. So let's go into the actual law. There are 30 enumerated powers in the U.S. Constitution. Usually people quote Article 1, Section A of the Constitution as the exhaustive list of congressional power, but in reality, there are 30 to 35, depending on how you count them. So let's talk about the property clause, because that's Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2, which it says, quote, the Congress shall have power to dispose of and make all needful regulations respecting the territory, very important word, or other property belonging to the United States. Property is another word. That doesn't mean public lands, and territory is what Utah was before it became a state. Anyway, and nothing in this Constitution shall be so construed as to prejudice any claims of the United States or of any particular state. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 says, to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district, not exceeding 10 miles square as made by session or particular states, and the acceptance of Congress become the seat of the government of the United States and exercise like authority over all places purchased by the consent of the legislature of the state in which the same shall be for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. And of course, in Article 1, Section 8, it talks about post roads and that kind of thing. So there's nothing that comes close to Obama signing a document saying 1.3 million acres are now a national monument. Not even close. Okay, right. That was a lot, Randall. But you wanted meat, listeners, debaters. You wanted the law. Tell me that justifies anything. Don't go to the Supreme Court, because they're corrupt anyway. But the point is, has nothing to do with anything doing with national monuments or parks, for that matter, in my novice interpretation.
Now, so we could justify property for, say, international or interstate highways under post roads. Okay, I'll go for that. We could justify forts, magazines, docks. An area
not really necessary.
No more than 10 miles square for the seat of government.
Could we also look at some of those and say, like the Postal Service? Times have changed. Now, I know you mushy constitutionalists who want to use it to justify your positions will say, oh, you're saying living document. No, I'm saying fundamentally, mankind has changed. So there may be no need for the post office. I'm just saying, no offense, Ben Franklin, but
Hey,
there might be some
I still
change.
like to send some letters.
You like to send first class.
Second class.
No, first class is all government. Now, I want to share something. There are 3 conceptions of the property clause. The narrowest is called the proprietary theory. This maintains, and I'm taking this from the Heritage Institute, which I'm not a big fan of, but this is okay. Anyway, it maintains that the property clause simply allows Congress to act as an ordinary owner of land. It can set policy regarding whether lands should be sold or retained. And if they are retained, who may enter these lands and for what purposes. Broadest conception is the police power theory, regards the clause as conferring not only the powers of ownership, but also general sovereign authority to regulate private conduct that occurs on federal land or that affects federal land. In default of any federal rule, state law applies. So that would be the common accepted theory, is the police power. There's a medium one, Randall. It's called the protective theory. This concept would go between or go beyond the proprietary theory in regarding the clause as a partial source of sovereign authority. So what this comes down to, Randall, is the federal government an owner of land that it has to distribute at some point, or does it have partial or complete sovereign authority over that land?
Well,
when we read the Constitution just now, I didn't see any kind of sovereignty there.
Now, the BLM, or the Bureau of Land Management, was initially set up just specifically to oversee the distribution of lands. You know, they help manage lands getting to people who wanted to have land, and we're going to go build on it, homestead. They were going to, improve the land and make the land better. That was their mandate. But we've moved from that into a protective position where the BLM comes in and they tell you that you cannot go on, instead of trying to give it to you or provide a way for you to gain ownership of it. And I don't know. I've thought a couple times that maybe the change out here in the West came because the land became drier. Water was harder to get to.
They always use that as a reason for the federal government supposed to be able to manage better. And besides, it's arid. It's barren land. So there's no property value there. That's one of the justifications for the feds.
But if there's no property value there, then why make it a national monument? Because no one would really want to come see it or visit it if there was no value.
Right.
There's lots of value out there.
And why would the federal government send troops, literally troops, to public lands, so-called, to arrest the Bundy clan, or up into Oregon? Who cares? If you saw the Malheur Reserve out there, that place was barren. And when the brother and father that were locked up for burning 140 acres, they were given a 5-year prison term for terrorism. You advocates of the federal government controlling the land, you be a family who gets a BLM approved fire going and it gets a little out of control. Look, I grew up on a farm. We burned weeds all the time. That can happen real easy. BLM approved the fire, 140 extra acres. Nothing was damaged. No fence lines, no properties. They give this father and son 5 years of terrorism, under terrorism charges. And so that's why the Bundys went up to Oregon. I have this great story about when Ammon Bundy actually went to the house of the mother, and at first she didn't like him, but he wanted her over time. It's like, really? They're going to lock your family up for 5 years for terrorism? You tell me that's constitutional. And I'll come squat on your land because, this land is our land. This land is your land. Anyway, so that's what we see, is that when you look at Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2, and you look at Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, you see that there is no justification for national monuments. That isn't even we sign that to you and then you're giving it back to us and then you're taking it. You just took the land and you affected people's lives. You have no constitutional authority to take land that you weren't controlling in the first place. So when I hear people advocate that this is okay, it really angers me, because I think you're not being affected by the federal government. If you're arguing for the federal government to control land, you know what I think? I think that you have no land. You have no property. You have no stake in this argument. It's all theory and intellectualism for you. But you're not actually being impacted by the federal government, except through your taxes and the destruction of your currency to pay for all this.
This is a little bit of a tangent, but I'm going to say it anyway.
Do it.
Thomas Jefferson, the great debate was Thomas Jefferson versus Hamilton. Hamilton wanted us to be a commerce-based society, a business-based society, and Jefferson wanted us to be an agrarian or based on Georgics, right? We want to be connected with the land.
Want dirty fingers.
Lots of dirty fingernails, yeah.
Work in the land.
And a few years ago, after the markets crashed here and the housing market came apart, I was forced into a position with my family that was, I guess you'd say it was pretty precarious. We didn't have. I mean, the first year after everything came apart, I made a total taxable income of, well, I don't know, it wouldn't be taxable under current laws, but $6,000 was my gross income for the year. Let that sink in, people. Most of you make, not most of you, but some of you probably make more than that in a month today. But over that year and the following year, we had the opportunity to live somewhere where we had land and we had a garden. And we all spent time as a family in that garden, and it provided the majority of what we ate during the summer. I mean, we had 42-pound watermelon we grew out of it. We had squash and peppers and romaine lettuce and beets, and we ate out of that garden and supplemented with a little bit of canned food here or rice here or whatnot, but a lot of it was just these vegetables. And I came to really understand what Thomas Jefferson meant, because I connected with that land and I totally understood, or I felt anyway at that time, how important it was to have that connection. Because if I'm connected to my land and the government, federal government, state government, city government, whatever, comes to affect my land in some case or change the rules governing how I can use my land, that directly affects my family, my livelihood. And so I'm concerned as an individual as to what happens. But when you live as someone who is a leaser, you rent or whatever, you have no connection to the land, it's a lot harder. Or even if you own land, but you're all tied up in commerce, you don't have that same connection. And it's easier for the government to run an end run around you and control things and change things so you don't have control of your land, and you maybe don't even know, you're not aware, you don't care because you're busy doing your own thing, or it doesn't affect you because you don't own the land.
Right.
Land ownership and use of the land is so important to the preservation of liberty. I am convinced because of that.
I think we are lied to with marketing and propaganda that the American dream is owning a home. I do not think that's accurate. I think that owning land, because in the old monarchy systems, the king distributed all resources. And if you weren't part of the regency and you weren't one of the dukes, or the earls or whatever around the country who happened to get some scraps from the king, you owned nothing. So for me, being an entrepreneur and being a landowner is the true American dream, or our pursuit of happiness, is to be able to continue on our own course with the right to own property. Randall, I want to share just a handful of bullet points in the ending. In case you guys think this is all conjecture, Rob Natelson, he is a constitutional scholar whose meticulous studies of the Constitution's original meaning have been repeatedly cited in U.S. Supreme Court opinions and published or cited by many top law journals. Okay, he knows more in his little finger than Randall, me, or any of you listening put together, is my guess. Now, he says of this article on the 10thamendmentcenter.com, it's called, "What Does the Constitution Say About Federal Land Ownership?" This is Constitution 101, folks. He says, This article has been cited widely, but it will not surprise you to learn many reject the conclusions. Yeah, here's this guy who's cited by the Supreme Court. Okay, so here's some key points as we wrap up here. Under the property clause, land titled to the federal government and held outside state boundaries is a territory. Federal land held within state boundaries is, quote, other property, end quote. If the host state agrees, the federal government can acquire an enclave within the state under the enclave clause. This grants governmental jurisdiction to the federal government, but the federal government has to acquire title separately. Washington, D.C., the most important enclave, for example, is under federal jurisdiction, but much of that land is held by other parties, including individuals. Here we go. The property clause gives Congress unconditional power to dispose of property and authority to regulate what is already held, but it does not mention a power to acquire national monuments, would you? Here's another one. It says, as for acreage, which is that other property part of the clause, within state and boundaries, under the necessary and proper clause, the federal government may acquire and retain land necessary for carrying out its enumerated powers. This includes parcels for military bases, post office buildings to house federal employees undertaking enumerated functions, that means written down, and the like. It is not necessary to form enclaves for these purposes. But within state boundaries, the Constitution grants no authority to retain acreage for unenumerated purposes such as land for grazing, mineral development, agriculture, forests, or parks. And once a state is created and is thereby no longer a territory, this was Utah's history, when they became a state, by the way, or a territory, they kicked Brigham Young, who was governor of the state of Deseret, the Mormon state. They kicked him out of office, and they put in their own appointed. Anyway, it says, once a state is created and is thereby no longer a territory, the federal government has a duty to dispose of tracts not used for enumerated purposes. That is so critical, that word enumerated. Enumerated means listed, numbered, written. If you think that that's legal to have a national park or monument, it is not in the Constitution. It's not enumerated, no matter what ruling the Supreme Court thinks they gave us or that Congress thinks the law they passed justifies. That was a good sentence.
Enumeration is the whole reason for the Constitution, so that you had a governing document, not a king that could rule arbitrarily, but that you had the president that lived within the bounds of the document. Enumerated powers, powerful, written down. Yeah.
Like the Bill of Rights. You know, it's funny how these opponents of the states taking over their lands, you know, they're fine with it not with national monuments not being written in the Constitution. But boy, you take away one of their rights that are in the Bill of Rights, they'd be all up in arms. So you can't have it both ways, folks. You got to either decide whatever's written there, that's the law, and should be written accordingly. Now, Randall, I want to throw this out before we end real quick. This is for another discussion. In the process of disposal, the federal government must follow the rules of public trust. It would be a breach of fiduciary duty for the feds to simply grant all of its surplus property to state governments. Each tract must be disposed of in accordance with the best interests of the American people. So just Utah taking the land, that's got to be a discussion for another day on nullification and all those things. We got to dig into this more, but I think we got a good bedrock tonight, Randall, for public lands and the constitutional legal approach to what the federal government is allowed to do and not do.
Yeah, and we got to just have the government abide by that. So if that's the case, and the state can't just take it, then maybe they have to provide an avenue for private ownership of those lands.
Absolutely. And it says nothing about them acquiring lands. So there we go.
What?
For national monuments or anything. Well, hey, we want to thank everyone for listening in tonight. It's a very important issue to people that are in the West, in Utah, and all the other Western states who are heavily controlled by the feds. We hope you found something interesting. This video will be up on Pyrolitical's Live's YouTube channel. We're going to put all these links. You can go and post comments, like, subscribe, do all those good things to help us out. We come at you every Wednesday at 7 o'clock Mountain Standard Time with the best and most meaty political topics available.
Amen, brother. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.